Good morning, Eileen. This is myself, Nancy Kuykendall, with Eileen Moynihan doing our author chat. And how are you today?
I'm very good today, thank you. So, how are you yourself?
I'm doing just fine. And as we've told you before, I am in North Dakota in the USA. And Eileen, what is this place in Ireland that you are?
Well, I'm in the village of Barry, which is near to Longford, and it's beside the River Shannon. One side of the Shannon is County Longford, and the other side is County Roscommon. So, but I'm only 10 minutes from Longford town, which is in the next county.
Okay.
And it's in the middle of Ireland, more or less the middle of Ireland.
So that river runs through the middle of Ireland then.
It's the longest river in Ireland, the Shannon.
Okay. Well, I've seen a lot of your photos and they're beautiful there.
Thank you.
Looks like a very nice place to visit.
It's actually quite flat where I live now. There would be a lot of lakes and rivers.
Okay. Well, there are some lakes around, but we are not near any big bodies of water. We have a very small river that runs through Jamestown, North Dakota. And we have a big reservoir and there's little lakes, but we're not anywhere near an ocean. We're stuck in the middle of the country and a little ways to get some bigger lakes, but two different kinds of geography, I think.
Well, the oceans would only be like an hour and a half drive from me, either way, to the east coast or the west coast, because it's quite a small island. Okay. Of course, it is an island, so you're surrounded by the sea.
Yeah. So we live in very different places, but we have had the opportunity to meet each other through an authors group we are in, and we would like to talk to you today about editing. It's something that all authors contend with every single book, and there are many forms of editing that we use to get through our book and to have it fully ready for publishing. And I'm going to name the four main types of editing that we're going to discuss today. And one is developmental editing. Another is line editing. Another is copy editing. And another is proofreading. And many of you may have heard of all of these, and you may or may not have used all of these in your work. Most of these, well, all of these can be done by a professional that you would hire. You can also do some of it yourself, but we always need other eyes on our work. So we want to delve into how each of these helps an author perfect their book as best as possible before it goes to you, the reader. So Eileen, let's start with developmental editing.
Well, I read somewhere that it's like building a house. So you're putting the structure in. So you might not even have written anything, but you've got ideas in your head. So you might go to someone and say, well, I've got this idea, but I'm not sure how to progress it. Or I've got the beginning and the end, but I don't know what happens in between. So you might tweak out some ideas with that person, and then you might eventually get some kind of idea of where the plot might be going in your chapters. So and then this kind of evaluation is when you've actually written the manuscript, and then somebody might go through that, which is part of the development as well, and see how the whole thing as a big picture is going. So that's how I would describe developmental.
Yeah, it's a hard word to say. I stumbled over it myself. I was just thinking, as you said that it just popped in my head. We might have a whole like outline of a story that we want to give a developmental editor to check, but it just popped in my head. What if we only had like the beginning of a story and we had a vague idea of where we wanted it to go? Maybe a developmental editor could suggest, like AI could suggest to us some places that we might go with the story, some different ideas. Have you thought of that before with developmental editing?
Yes, I mean, I think I often do this with my friends in the writing group, that I might say what is in my mind, and then I'd be getting all these different ideas, and I might take them home and mull them over and then start writing, and then go back to them with what I've done and get their ideas as well. So you could get developmental editor, but you could also use people you know that other writers as well.
Yeah, you could go back and have utilized a bunch of their ideas, but you know, 2 heads or 3 or 4 or 5 heads are better than one. It's amazing how many ideas can come when you talk to people, you know, that
It is.
help you with that, things you haven't thought of, and then you really like that idea. There's a little bit maybe in some authors, and I know this is a little bit in me, where I want the whole thing to be mine. I want the whole thing to be my ideas and my work. And I don't want people messing with me. So it sounds maybe kind of
I
odd.
think we're all a bit like that. We're all a bit like that. But
So I'm
sometimes
like,
you say,
I might ask
what?
suggestions, but I might be careful who I ask, and I'll
Yes.
definitely pick and choose, because I I sometimes read these things about the different kinds of editing, and I'm like, well, yeah, but by the end of the book, I want it to be all mine. So,
Yes.
but they're there to help, and just to help you brainstorm, if nothing else, with other ideas. And now I often think of content editing very much as developmental editing, but in your idea of your house being built, how did you incorporate that? I know you had
The
from
content now is more like, as they say, putting the furniture in and
Mhm.
moving it around to see what suits. So you're going to be looking at your paragraphs, and you you might decide maybe that would be better at the beginning rather than the end of the chapter, or maybe the next chapter would be better as the first chapter. So you're kind of trying things out and see if they suit
Mhm.
the story and suit the plot.
I was actually, it wasn't reading, but this applies to books and speeches, I think. I was just giving a little talk one day, and I had in my mind, you know, the flow, like we would for a book. And then my mind skipped a part, and when it came to me, I added it in, and it was okay, I thought, but it really needed to go earlier. And it
Yes,
occurred to me that's like in writing, you might read a story sometimes where even a finished book, as a reader, you might read a story and go, oh, huh, wonder why, you know, this didn't tie up here or there. You know, you just might have questions as a reader, but every writer's going to put it together a little bit different way. But I was thinking how this very much applies to books, how we get them in order. And it can apply to if we're speaking somewhere about books or something else, how we put our thoughts in order to make the most sense, you know, where it's going to be said or written.
that's true, you know, because I mean, it depends if you're going to tell something chronologically. Some people have flashbacks.
Hmm.
There's lots of different ways of dealing with the time sequence and with the characters. So you have to kind of think about what genre you're writing or the person is writing in, and what suits, and does something spoil the plot, or
Right.
could something be added in that would add more suspense?
I read a book recently. I won't even mention it right now, but it was told in three time frames. Well, actually, one person's point of view, and it would flip to another person's point of view on the same thing. And then there was and that was speaking of the past. And then there was a present day point of view with the present day character and how she was. It was books within the book I was reading and how she was dealing with those books.
Yes,
It kind of had a lot of layers. I thought, wow, that was pretty ingenious, you know, to put that all together. It goes together very well, actually.
there'd be a lot of hard work to sort all that out.
Yes, I thought, I don't think I'm ready for that yet.
And trying to keep up with what's happening where, you know.
Hmm. Well, I should give that author a plug. It's called an The Echo of Old Books.
It's a lovely title.
And I'm going to look very quickly while we continue, because since I've mentioned her book, I should say who wrote it. Um, and then we can continue. Oh, okay. Yes. The Echo of Old Books by Barbara Davis.
Right, it
I
sounds
don't know
intriguing.
her. I don't know her at all. This book was a gift to me, and it is
Yes,
written in a very unusual way. And I thought, wow, that took some doing to put that together. But you can follow it. It makes sense.
well, that's the main thing, is like, does it work?
Hmm. It's working.
So really that's what you're doing, is trying to say, does this book actually work? Does the story work?
Yes.
If not, what's the problem? Do we need to take something out, put something in, juggle something around?
You know, it kind of comes back down to in our own heads, we know what we mean. Like when we're writing and maybe we're going to get to line editors and beyond, but they catch something that doesn't make sense to them. It made sense to us because we knew what was in our head, but it doesn't make sense to an outside reader. And so it's like that with all those parts of editing. It has to make sense, you know, in those things she's combined in her book, and otherwise, to the author, it's making total sense. But we have to make sure it makes sense to the reader. So
Yeah, sometimes you need to give a bit of a backstory for your readers as well.
because they can't read our mind.
No.
So okay, so those are like the larger parts of editing that we might work with until we get down to the nitty-gritty, which next in our list is line editing. Now, line editing is very important, I think, and something that most of us have done in one way or another. There's multiple ways we can do that with, as we've talked about before, our computers reading back to us, or using programs like Grammarly or editing in Word to find our errors, or you know, hiring an editor to read our work. And I always make sure I get another set of eyes. It's my editor who sees my writing, because it is so true. I might know what I'm saying, but the reader may not know what that sentence meant.
Yes, because I know I do have convoluted sentences, which, like somebody says, well, wouldn't that be better if you turned it around?
Exactly.
So,
Switch the sentence. Yeah.
and it makes more sense, or it's not so long and hard to read. So the
Right.
easier it is to read, the better. Yeah.
Yes. Because sometimes if we split a sentence a certain way, it sounds like maybe our adjectives or something are describing not the thing we want it to describe. And if we switch it around, it's more clear what belongs to what, you know, what words belong to what idea. I've found that sometimes for myself. And so, yes, sometimes switching the sentences. And then horror of all horrors, which we all talk about all the time, are the commas. Now
Oh, yes.
that's going to come in line editing and further in copy editing, and maybe even proofreading. But a misplaced comma can really change the way a sentence is read and what it means.
That's
And
very true.
I don't think I ever do even one day's writing without looking up commas. I look up commas everywhere, like, okay, would I need a comma there or not? Or when I read this, is it saying what I want it to say? And there is a lot of discrepancy, really.
There is. And because I can remember at school being told, like, you breathe where there is a comma if you're reading out loud from a book or something. So I was kind of turning that around and saying, well, would I breathe here or put a comma in? And I
Right.
tend to put in too many commas. That's my biggest vice, I think. I put in too many
I
commas.
think that was me too, and I'm using less. And I sometimes read books, I'm like, wow, they didn't use very many commas. Well, what do you know? They didn't use a lot of commas.
Yes.
It's very subjective. Different editors and different readers are going to have a different idea about commas. And some of the very basics that we learn, which in some ways I missed a lot of the basics and learned later, um, like separating a flow, like two or three or more things, you know, with
Like
commas.
a list of things.
Yes. And the other day I was thinking about a 2-word list, just 2 words, and I thought,
Yeah.
well, that need a comma. And then I thought, I'm just going to look that up. And I learned something I hadn't thought about, or maybe I just didn't remember. Um, you would use a comma in that case if it replaced the word and, but if not, you wouldn't need the comma.
Because the way when I was brought up in school, you didn't put a comma before an and in a list. You'd have your comma after each thing. But when you got to and, you didn't put a comma in. Whereas I think it seems to be more an American thing that you do put a comma in. But sometimes I think if you put a comma in, it makes more sense. It
Mhm.
reads better sometimes. I think it depends on the sentence.
I think so too. They add clarity, or if you don't use them well, they add confusion maybe. So that is one of the main things I always have to look at and look at and look at and see how different programs maybe are seeing it. Because if I use an editing program and it says a comma here and not a comma there, but my editor might say it opposite of that. And I think it really comes down to how you want that sentence to read. What's your meaning?
That's it. And very important thing to probably going back to the previous editing is that if you are editing someone's work, that you don't overdo it, that you let that person's voice speak. And it's just to make the story flow better. That's what the editor's job is, I think, because each person has a unique voice and a unique style. So you have to kind of be careful of being over like with the red pen or whatever.
Right. You don't want to turn it into your own way of thinking or your own voice.
No.
So you have to listen, while you're reading somebody else's. And in line editing, as well as in copy editing, when it gets a little more nitpicky on punctuation and spelling, there are times when I just sit and look and think, does that word need to be there or not need to be there? And sometimes it's more cluttery, and sometimes it's clearer if you put it there. And that's where I
Yes.
rely on an editor, how it's reading as they read through, because, after a while, when we're working on it ourselves, it kind of gets all mushed in our brain and like we know what we mean, but we get into it so much trying to sort it out that it gets a little mushy and we need somebody else's clarity to see it.
Because
And
often
that,
when you're often
no,
when you write yourself, you find when you read it back, oh, I've repeated that word so many times, or it's a bit repetitive to use a different word.
mhm, right. And others can sometimes check that more easily. And I think line editing is very important. And, checking those sentences that maybe could be switched. Or, it's easy in line editing and in copy editing. I mean, it's work, but looking, that person is the one who's going to catch, oh, um, this word, the double letter got put on a different letter. The double letter is wrong,
Mm.
or an S was missing for plural, or it just got spelled backwards. Like I heard somebody say recently, they always mistype the word the. They type it TEH constantly in her typing, and she has to keep fixing herself.
Yes.
It has to do with her typing. But those kinds of things, it's easy to do. And that is where a line editor and a copy editor can check to make sure that they found our typos. And many of those things are strictly typos.
Another thing I was thinking about, which I've come across, so I grew up in England and I'm living in Ireland a long, long time now, but sometimes when I'm looking at people's work, they would spell or express themselves the way they would speak, which might not always be grammatically correct,
Right.
which I think is fine if it's someone speaking, if it's actually speech, because the person would speak in their accent. So that would be allowed. It's sometimes hard not to, you're thinking that that's not grammatically correct, but that's how the person would say it. So you have to kind of balance that.
Right. I've come across that with books using different eras, how people spoke in those times, or different countries, like you said. And you know, as an American reading something like that, I might say, "Oh, well, that's different," but that's the way they speak or use the words. And then again, like you said, in dialogue, a person, whoever the character is, in dialogue, they pretty much can speak however they want to because that's how that person speaks. And the writer has to
Yes.
figure all of that out and still make sense of it for the reader. So after those, did you have anything specific to say about line editing or copy editing any further?
Well, I would tend to, when I'm looking at something myself, I do just tend to get down into the line editing a lot myself.
Mhm, me too.
because I think that's just the way I am, I think, you know.
Mhm.
And I know I would hate to see a mistake in my own work. And I like to help a person, you know, get the piece as good as they can get it. And the people are going to say, oh, she couldn't spell that and she couldn't do that right. And, you know, I think you have to really, it's like polishing up your woodwork, whatever you've done, you know.
Right. And in your case, you know, when we're reading over here something written in England or maybe in your area, the difference in the spellings, like color, you have O-U-R at the end, and we
That's
don't have,
right, yes.
or words with Z's, you have S's, realizing, those kind of things. And as soon as I'm reading a book and I see those, I go, oh, let me check. I think this author is from Great Britain, you know, and
Yes.
usually so. So that's just the way it's done there. And they read our books and say, oh, they didn't put a S, they put a Z, you know, those kind of things. That's kind of minor. It tells you what part of the world it came from. But
That's right, yes.
I don't know if you feel this way, but I always want my manuscript as polished as possible before my editor ever sees it. Because I want the editor to say, oh, she did a good job this time, or she did a better job this time.
Yes.
It's kind of like along the lines of people who they have a housekeeper, but they want their house cleaned up before the housekeeper comes to clean. You know,
Exactly.
like that.
I think a lot of people do that anyway.
Yes. So I'm like that with my book, like, okay, I want to get this really, really as tight as I can and as perfect as I can before I send it off. But there are always things to be found still.
See, then you might be editing for somebody who might have dyslexia, and they know, they're aware, but they might be brilliant writers, but the spelling and the grammar or whatever might need extra care. So they'd be aware of that themselves.
Yes. I know when I was growing up, spelling was one of my worst subjects, I guess you could say. I don't do any writing without a dictionary right next to me, because even my phone dictionary, because I cannot go through a writing period without saying, wait a minute, did I spell that right? And sometimes it'll correct you on your document, you know, or other times I'll use a word that just flowed out of me, came out of me, whatever. And I'll say, oh, wait a minute, am I really using that word correctly? So I'll look it up,
Yes.
make sure that I'm actually using the right word. You know,
that's right. I have to shout out to my husband, spell such and such.
yeah.
And then I double check.
I have to second guess myself a lot because that was not one of my strong points for whatever reason. But after those, there's two more parts maybe we can touch on, and one is proofreading and one is beta readers. So how would you describe proofreading and beta readers?
Well, proofreading, it has already had the line editing, and it's formatted, it's all ready to be published. So that's just before it goes out to the world. Proofreading, just to make sure there's no little typos that you've missed, or you might not have used a capital letter where you should do, or something like that. So that's where I would say you use the proofreading. It's the last piece before it does go out to the world.
Right. And like editors, proofreaders can be hired. They all have different rates. All those different types of editing down to proofreading have different rates for that type of editor. And, you know, now do you see beta readers this way, that they are similar to proofreaders, but usually a group of people an author has found who are readers, who will read it as readers. They're not looking at it as editors. They're just reading the story. And then they can report back, you know, if it all seemed to flow correctly, or wait a minute, you know what, when you were in that chapter, I got all confused, you know, something they might point out to an author that can be changed before it's printed.
Yeah, I think usually some beta readers are paid, but others don't. But they might get a free book from you or whatever. But they're usually people you know, have been reading your books, enjoy your genre, and you know that they would be good at giving feedback. That they would be people who've read a lot and know their books. So, and it's a good idea to give them a list of what you want feedback on, so that they can kind of, whether it's your characters or your style or the plot, you can break it down into like what you'd like to get feedback on.
Now, in the you're in your area, we've got feedback again of some sort on my end. In your area, does your writers group, do you read for each other as beta readers?
Some of us have, have said, "Oh, would you mind reading that for me? Read my book." We do have a critique group, which is separate from the ordinary group, because you don't have much time when you meet. It's usually just reading a piece of writing or discussing something. So you're kind of limited on time. Whereas we have an online email group as well, which people have opted to go into, and we take one person's, well, it only might be a chapter or something like that once a month, or a poem, and then we all give feedback on that.
Okay.
But I have used people from the writers group as well privately to give me feedback.
That's nice to have. We have a writers group that feedback. We have a writers group here, and we often read to each other at our meetings, a section we're working on. Sometimes longer, it's just a short story, we might read the whole thing and get feedback, and that's helpful.
It is helpful, yes. And it's good when, people say the same thing, well, more or less the same things. I thought this was very good, or I think that needs working on, that part. And when several people have said the same thing, then that probably does need fixing.
Right. And what we found is it's kind of like editing for yourself. When we're reading it out loud to the group, suddenly we're like, oh, no, that's not right. I need to fix that.
Yes.
It just comes to you right in your face. Oh, no, I didn't write that sentence right. I'll fix that. And you make a little note and then you keep reading. But
you'd often see you got your tenses wrong or something silly like that. Yeah.
Yeah, tense is another thing that can be tricky, and editors are very good at helping with that. Everybody has their area, maybe they're not as strong as another, but the commas and the tense and all of those kind of things can get mixed up when you're in the flow. And even when you've looked at it further, editors help very much with that kind of thing. So we had 4 main topics, but developmental editing, evaluation editing, and content fall into one blob there. And then we had the line editing, the copy editing, and the proofreading. And then we talked about the beta readers too. Is there anything else you want to add today before we sign off?
Well, as I said, even if it's just part of your book, a chapter, it's no harm to maybe get a few people to have a look at it and give you feedback on it. And even if it was like a chapter every so often, if you're taking your time with it, you can take that back and then make the changes and eventually build it up, and then go on to the more detailed editing.
Right.
So I have paid editors in the past. I've done a lot myself, and I've edited for other people as far as I'm able.
Right, same here.
So you kind of get into it, you get an idea of what's wanted.
Yes, and what's helpful too is if you are editing for someone else. Now, I do some editing, but I wouldn't do every type of book or every genre. But the ones that I feel, are in my realm and that I would edit, it's very interesting to read them because you learn from their writing. Not only just maybe a style, but words they use that I haven't thought of, or ways they constructed sentences. And then you also just get to read the book. You're concentrating, but you get to read the story. And I enjoy that. But I certainly wouldn't not use editing for myself. I do use editing outside of myself.
No, I do believe it's very, very important to have somebody look at it, several people to look at it.
Yes. And one last thought is, I've run into this in the past, people who feel free to suggest. sometimes friends or relatives, if it's in that realm, they might just want to say, "Oh yeah, that's nice, that's good," not feel free to suggest or give their ideas. That might not be true for everybody, but I think in choosing um, beta readers, especially those who would be willing to say, you know what, in this chapter, this didn't make sense to me, something like that.
Yes, I think family and friends are going to just try and be nice most of the time. Whereas it's better to get real feedback. True,
Yeah,
it's better that people are honest. They don't have to be brutally honest, but
I don't have to be
honest,
mean.
to
Yeah,
be help, and you can take it on board or you can leave it. But
yeah,
it's probably very good to take advice. It's a good idea.
yes. I think so. I do take a lot of my editor's advice. Occasionally, I'll be like, no, that one doesn't work for me. And that's okay. We can pick and choose. In the end, it's ours, and we put it out there with help, without help, but hopefully with help the best we can. And for those who might be readers watching this, these are steps that all authors go through, besides the formatting and the cover designs that we painstakingly do for ourselves and our own learning, but for readers so they have an enjoyable experience and they find the book worth their time and money.
That's it. As a writer, you want to be proud of your work and the
Mhm.
work you put out there. And if you find there's something wrong, you don't feel very good about it. You
No.
do want your readers to see the best of your writing.
Mhm. I have had the experience of having the book fully published and out in readers' hands only to find an error that really disturbed me. I thought, no, I cannot have this. Some little tiny errors maybe you can overlook, but that one really bothered me. And I wasn't self-publishing at the time, and I had to go back to the publisher, pay a pretty penny for them to go in there and fix that for me. I couldn't live with it, and I didn't want it to be in readers' hands like that. So, yes.
At times, I have come across a book that people have published, and I'm just shocked because I just said this person didn't get any editing done at all because, and it's so bad, it spoils, you put down the book because you just can't read it.
Right.
So,
We
even
really
though
want we really
it's
want
not
our books to be readers.
very common, but it happens.
Yeah. It can happen, especially if we get too hasty. We want to get them out there and published, and in people's hands, but we don't want to be too hasty because we want it to be perfected as much as possible and worth the read, I would say. So,
That's it.
anything else? I guess we can say goodbye for today. We'll be back in another quarter to have another topic. Anything else, Eileen?
I don't think so. I've enjoyed that. And it's good to talk about these things because it reminds you of what you should be doing as well.
Yes. So, thank you for talking with me today. Always enjoy our chats, and hope you have a good rest of the day. Now it's later in the day for Eileen, so she's going on into her dinner hour, correct?
That's correct.
And I'm going to be
So
coming up to lunch fairly soon. So
you've got a whole day ahead of you.
I have a whole day ahead of me. So I hope you had a good day. And thank you so much for doing this. I'm glad we get to do it together. And
Thank you very much, Nancy. Always enjoy talking to you.
yeah, me too. I enjoy you. So have a great rest of your day, and we'll catch the rest of you later on our next author chat.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.